Welcome to the For the Love of Language podcast. I'm Stacy.
And I'm EJ.
She's got the giggles.
You just making fun of me. Oh my gosh.
It's my job to make fun of you.
It's totally my fault. I was saying funny things and cracking jokes.
Being a goofy goober.
As one does.
As one does.
You gotta keep it real, gotta have some fun.
We have fun.
But we're...
fun.
That's why we do this thing.
For realsies. You think we get paid for this? Nah. We're just a couple of clowns.
Right? But we're a couple clowns who are gonna talk about renaming.
Yeah. Tell me about it, EJ.
Well, I think, this is actually a pretty broad topic.
Yes.
But renaming is when something had a name.
Uh-huh.
And then you're deliberately changing it.
Yes.
Maybe you're deliberately changing your own name. Maybe you're changing a name of something else. There's, a billion different instances of this. But let's dig in a little bit to the how, the why, the what.
Okay, so I think first, before we dive into it, should we start on, an individual level and then grow to bigger organizations, or should we start big and go small?
This is how you know that we don't plan our pod ahead of time. We just
What?
send it. But yes, let's start small and go big. So start with a person. I like that.
Yeah, let's start with a person. So, why might someone choose to rename themselves?
Good question. I got married.
That's a really common one.
It's a really common one.
Yeah.
And then I did the normal societal expectation thing, and I changed my last name to my husband's last name.
There you go.
Which was a thing.
Which is a thing. Yes. Fun fact about the United States, in case you didn't know, we live in a patriarchal society. And so usually when people get married, they will usually it's someone who identifies as a woman will give up their last name to take on the man's last name. And this is still a super common practice. There's lots of different legal stuff put in place to account for it. It is probably one of the most common forms of renaming oneself is changing your name once you get married.
But it is still a pain.
It is still a pain.
I still have, my Google account still sometimes just, randomly pops up my last name from before.
Oh, interesting.
And it's just, at super random moments when it doesn't make sense.
Yeah. I will say this is changing a little bit. It is still, like I said, a very common practice within scientific communities or as women are becoming more educated. A lot of them are choosing to keep their own last names when they get married, partially for convenience because it does actually suck to get your driver's license changed, your passport changed, your social security card changed.
Or if you have your high school diploma, your university diplomas, and you now you need to prove that you had a name change if you're ever going to show anyone those diplomas as well.
If you've done research under a specific name and then that name changes, that can also be a pain to deal with professionally. So a lot of people are choosing to just keep their names, so they will be legally married, but their last names will be different.
Or there's actually some guys that change their names, or sometimes both change their names.
Yep.
We live in a different world.
We live in a very different world.
From I feel 30 years ago, even 10 years ago, it was way more standard and expected to change, for the woman to change her name. I feel now it's still definitely an expectation in a lot of places.
Yeah.
But it's also definitely way more accepted now for that to not happen.
Yes. These days it's a discussion.
Right.
Of okay, what do we want to do with our names?
Right.
When people decide they want to engage in a legal marriage, okay, what do we do about our names?
Right. And I personally like that, my husband and my son and I all have the same last name. There's areas where it gets rid of any confusion.
A uniformity to it,
right.
A sense of identity with each other as a familial group.
But I also did like my last name before,
yeah.
Right? So it's a very nuanced personal thing on that one.
It is. Some people also hyphenate their names.
Some people do. Or you get the adding names and names and names over generations, so you end up with 50 of them.
Yep, that's a little more common in Central and South America. people will have multiple last names.
Yeah.
I've had lots of conversations with my students about, you know, in the United States, we typically only have 2 names that you go by, but they'll have like 4 or 5. And so which of their last names do you use in a culture where you only use 2 names? I usually tell them it's their last name, and they're like, "Oh, interesting."
That one. Cool.
Yeah. I'm like, it's just more common. So that's probably the most typical name change is like last name changes.
Should we talk about first names?
Let's talk about first names. So there's a few different situations where people might want to change their first name.
I go by EJ.
Yes.
If you were wondering, that's not my legal name.
That is not EJ's legal name. That's how I call her too. So some people might have nicknames, and nicknames are probably the most common like name change that's not like legal, right? Like on all of EJ's documents, it has her legal name. Mm-hmm. But in casual everyday conversation, I just call her EJ. I don't call her by her legal name.
Right. And it just feels more natural and less formal, and like I like it. I've asked people to call me that because I like it. And it's really simple like that. Yeah. And I also personally like that when you use the acronyms or when you use like the letters EJ, it's not gendered.
Yeah.
And as a woman, unfortunately, there's sometimes advantages to people not instantly clocking you as a certain gender. Like you take J.K. Rowling, went by J.K. Rowling with Harry Potter because it was going to sell better if people didn't know off the bat
that it was written by a woman.
Right? Which is crazy and unfortunate. And hopefully society is moving away from that. Yeah. But there's been, you know, studies about resumes that are submitted with like historically Black names or historically female names and not getting as much traction as generally white male names. And so like that's an interesting real thing that people might consider at times.
Oh yeah, some people will definitely like change their name if they don't feel like it fits within societal norms. On the flip side, some people will change their name to specifically break cultural norms.
Absolutely.
So you'll see this a lot within like the transgender community. People will change their name because they feel like it doesn't fit their identity or who they see themselves as, and they want to be seen as someone or something different. And so you'll see different gendered names kind of being passed back and forth, but it's also getting more common to have just agendered names, like names that are not affiliated with a gender at all. So people being called Stone or River or Moon or like something that's like a natural phenomenon that doesn't have any like specific cultural or gendered qualities to it.
Well, there's also more traditional names that are also just cross-gender. So like Taylor, Morgan.
Alex is super common, yeah.
Right, like there's a bunch of them that aren't really seen as gendered, which is interesting.
Yeah. So a lot of people will change their names for societal reasons, one way or the other. Another reason that I've seen people change their name, I have a friend, his sister decided to change her name because she just did not like the name her parents gave her.
Fair.
She was just like, this is a weird name. I don't like it. Can we please change it to something I'm a little more comfortable with? Because it was kind of just like a strange choice for a name. And that happens. Sometimes parents make choices. And sometimes children don't like those choices. And they want to just make a different choice.
Which is totally fair. And, like, if you have a friend or a family member that's like, hey, I want to go by this, it's respectful to just accommodate that. Yeah. Right?
Absolutely.
And letting people kind of define their own identity and how they want to be referred to is, like I said, it's respectful and it's helpful. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Any of my students would know that, like, the very first thing we do in class is we talk about their names, because I have something that's I have a name that's on my list, and that may not be the name that they want to use in the United States, or that may not be, or, you know, maybe it needs to be pronounced a certain way, I'm not pronouncing it right, or they prefer to go by, like, their middle name or a different name that's, like, not on my list. So I love to have that conversation with people so that I can identify them in the way that they would prefer to be identified.
Right. I actually think that that's really, really pertinent. Like, this topic is really interesting with language classes and, like, cross-cultural stuff specifically. Because, like, my name, either my actual name or EJ, is not particularly, like, translatable between languages. Or, like, it's hard to say exactly as it is between languages.
Yeah.
And so if I'm speaking Russian or Spanish, I actually have a different name that I ask people to call me in that language that's more of like a translation of my name.
Yeah.
And so when someone is speaking Spanish to me, it's not like jarring as they break out of it to say something in English to refer to me.
Yeah.
Like, I actually prefer being referenced by a more natural, native sounding name in the language that I'm speaking.
Oh yeah, this is most common, I've noticed, with a lot of my students that come from Eastern Asia. So the Philippines, I've had Filipino students do this, Taiwan, China, Japan. Any students that I've had from those countries, they will usually have a preferred English name that they like to go by. So someone might, their name in Chinese might be like June, but they prefer to go by Billy. That's just how they like to be called, and that's their English name. So they prefer people, when they're speaking in English, to call them by that name.
Right.
So,
and then you're forming your identity in that language and in that environment, partly with that name that you're choosing to go by. And I think that's cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Whenever people ask me to call them by like a completely different name, I say, sweet, let's go.
Yeah.
whatever works. And then if they have a specific, like, I try to always be respectful of like, oh, does it need to be pronounced like a certain way? So like, I had a student, for example, her name looked very English, but it was supposed to be pronounced a completely different way than I would normally say it. So instead of saying Heidi, I said Haiti. That's just like a simple vowel change, but that change like made a difference. So even little stuff like that, in terms of people maintaining their cultural identity, it's important to make sure that you're pronouncing people's names correctly based on how they want to be identified.
Right. And when it comes to like that pronunciation and saying things the way that people like want it to be said, it might sound like a small thing, and to some people it might be.
Yeah.
But to other people that's really significant.
Yeah.
Like, you're making the effort to refer to them the way that they want to be referred to, and like that can actually be extremely meaningful for people.
Yep.
And I would say it's one of those areas where it's like definitely worth the effort.
But it is 100% personal. So as you are moving throughout the world, be respectful of people's names and how they want them to be pronounced and how they want to be identified, because people will have different feelings and associations with their names. So be aware of that. I think that's it for renaming on a personal level.
I agree.
So we've talked about last names, first names.
We step back to a more societal, global level.
Yeah. I'm trying to think if there's anywhere in between, because I have a feeling we're going to jump right to like country, continent level, and I'm wondering if there's any like middle ground.
Maybe. I have an example.
Okay.
So there's a mountain peak kind of local to us in Utah.
Yes, I think I know which one you're talking about.
That used to be referred to as Squaw Peak.
Aha.
But maybe you have a better grasp on like the reasons behind the name change, actually.
Yes. So the reason for the name change is because the word squaw has been used as a slur to identify Native American women. And it's harmful, it perpetuates harmful stereotypes, and belittles, like, indigenous communities.
Right. So they've renamed this peak from Squaw Peak to Kive Peak, I believe, which is a Native American word for mountain, if I remember right.
Interesting that we're calling it Mountain Peak. I mean, I guess
Let me
that's
look it up real quick.
Okay, yeah.
It is a Ute word meaning mountain. So yes,
Fabulous.
Kive Peak. And
Kive
so
Peak.
Ute, that's one of the Native American tribes that's local to the area. And so they renamed it from something that was an ethnic slur to something that's acknowledging the local peoples. Now,
Yes.
obviously, there's a ton of people who've grown up just calling the mountain Squaw Peak, not having any idea that squaw actually meant anything to anyone. And it's the kind of change that, like, is probably going to be a little bit slow to catch on.
Yeah. It will take a little bit of time. I know that my parents will definitely probably still use like the old phrase because that's how they grew up. But like as we are becoming more naturalized within our community and more in touch with like where we're at and acknowledging the, you know, the harm that has been done, it's important to make changes like that of saying, hey, like we don't want to cause harm with the language we are using. How can we change it to better reflect a more like collaborative society rather than a combative one?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think that's a really good example. And I'm sure there's lots of other examples around of changing city names or other like geographical location names. I think that's a perfect example of acknowledging more indigenous communities as well. We're getting better at it. There's been a lot of like activism around, you know, acknowledging land and trying to give land back to people and making sure that we take care of things. And so renaming stuff to kind of be reflective of more local traditional values and cultures is a great way to go about doing that.
Right. So that's kind of an example that's relatively local, relatively small, but I think it happens across the board everywhere. Like there's renaming is a huge thing in marketing. Like there's tons of companies that rebrand and rename because they want to give a different image, a different vibe. One of the main type 1 diabetes nonprofits recently renamed themselves from like a juvenile diabetes reference to more of just like a general type 1.
Oh, interesting.
To try and partly eliminate that misconception that type 1 is a juvenile disease, right? Because you can totally be diagnosed as an adult.
Yeah.
And so part of that renaming is also like reframing and educating.
Yes. Yeah. That's within scientific communities, specifically in like animals and plant worlds, like we have classification systems that are based on Latin. And so there's a lot of like Latinized and anglicized versions of animal names, but more and more scientists are not just using the Latin names for things. They're also using indigenous names for the animals as well, or other like varieties of the names that will like reflect the history and culture of like the countries and places where the animals come from. So it's helping people, especially within those countries, to connect to those animals more by providing education and science using the names and terms that they're already familiar with.
So this happens across the board in like companies, marketing, politics, religion. I mean, we could talk. It might get a little controversial.
We can talk about it.
We could talk about the switch around the term Mormon.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it's been pretty hot and spicy, especially for people who are not Mormons but are Mormon enthusiasts.
Or for people who are ex-Mormon, post-Mormon. So to give a little bit of background on this, for a very long time, Mormon is a term that's been used for members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, partly in reference to the Book of Mormon. Mormon is a prophet in the Book of Mormon, and so people in that religion have been referred to for a very long time as Mormons. Yep. And from my understanding, like quite a while ago, it might have been used as a slur more. But then there were
that was like very early on.
But then for quite a while, it was actually a source of pride. So like when I went and served an LDS mission, a Mormon mission, to Russia, there was actually a church campaign called the I Am a Mormon campaign.
Yeah.
And the church told us to make videos of ourselves and end it with, and I'm a Mormon. And this was a huge marketing campaign led by the church.
Yeah.
But then more recently in the last couple of years, there's been a big switch with them saying, actually, we don't want to be called Mormons anymore. That's insulting. That's offensive.
Yeah.
We want to be called members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Yes. And this has been, it's been heated mostly because there has been such a global campaign to identify it one way and then to have like a hard pivot in the opposite way. So like.
Right. And to a lot of people who have like left the church, it feels like gaslighting because it's like we were told to advertise ourselves as this. And now we're being told that, like, using this term is offensive.
Yeah. And what's really interesting, too, is people who have never been Mormon, who have just like heard about it, they identify the religion as like Mormonism. And so like people who are just trying to understand what's going on can get very confused and honestly a little bit I've seen people kind of get a little bit scared to like ask questions to like people who are of the religion because they know it as like Mormons, but then someone might feel so strongly about the recent change that they're not willing to have a discussion with someone who only knows the term Mormon. You know?
Right.
So it's kind of led to a bit of a disconnect, not just between current members and former members, but also members and just the global community that knows about the religion.
Right, it is really interesting. But the stated, like, purpose in that name change, because it is, like, a change in how they refer to themselves and how others refer to them, like, the stated purpose in that is centering Christ and the fact that it is a Christian religion in the name and in the reference.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. Like, is that message lost in that change? I don't know.
I don't know either. This is fresh.
It is fresh.
It's been within the last couple of years, but name changes, on personal levels, name changes can be really, easy to adapt to because it's a singular person.
But it's
this
harder.
is a global organization.
And I feel like in this case, it's a lot harder, partly because it is a religion. Yeah. Partly because it's like such a deep emotional and spiritual attachment to your identity. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's made this one more controversial than like place name changes or person name changes or really any other kind of name change, to be honest. Like, I think it just hits at a much more personal level, and so that makes it more difficult for some groups to accept it, and also just like historically it's been used for a really, really long time.
So it'll be interesting to see where that goes, and how time affects that choice and those changes. As of right now, it's still kind of, there's some static, some conversation, some noise about it.
Yeah, and a lot of opinions. And that's like a local example for us, partly being in Utah right now and like kind of growing up in that environment. But I think it's a good and interesting example of this kind of like renaming and it being a little bit more nuanced.
Yes.
In some situations.
Yeah. To kind of dive into some other kind of more global examples, things that we can identify on like a larger level, there are some instances where like having a longer name or a more nuanced name has been like used purposefully and distinctively. So an example that I'm thinking of is two countries in Africa. You have Congo, and then you have the Democratic Republic of Congo. Both have Congo in them, obviously, but they are different countries and they operate very differently. And they, like, the Democratic Republic of Congo has felt that it is necessary to add onto their name to distinguish them in their operations from this other country and to just establish a new identity, which is interesting.
Yeah. And you have lots of cases where like countries break up into more than one country, like
Czechoslovakia? Wait, oh no!
Czechoslovakia.
Czechoslovakia. There we go.
Which is no longer
We apologize. The back half of that name just like got away from us.
Right. Ouch, that's embarrassing. That hurts. But that's okay.
It's okay, we both embarrassed ourselves. As long as it's both of us, it's okay.
Yeah, but now, like, that's two different countries, and they actually, in that case, kind of split the name into. But in other cases,
the Czech Republic and Slovakia.
Right. But in other cases, you come up with, like, whole new names.
Yes.
So, like, it's a very interesting thing. There's also been a push from some countries to, like, change the spelling of their name. Or how, like, Turkey is an example that I think of. That, like, when I was a little kid, the spelling was the same as the bird in English, right? For Turkey. But now it actually, in order to be respectful, like, you use more of their spelling, which actually includes, like, a letter that doesn't exist in American English, right? So you get a lot of interesting political, cultural changes and statements that can be made with namings or even the spellings of the names.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you have examples culturally wanting to build your own identity with the name that you use for your country, for your place.
Yes. Another example that came to my mind is Pakistan and India. And do you know a little bit about the history between those two countries?
I know some.
Yeah. So for our listeners, Pakistan and India actually used to be all India. But then there were some cultural differences. Islam came in and became a predominant religion on that side of India. And due to like this religious difference, political differences, cultural differences, there was a lot of conflicts and stuff. They ended up separating and becoming two different countries. So Hindi and Urdu can actually be mutually intelligible, but they use different writing systems. But it's because historically they were once the same country, but to kind of like reflect a difference in ideologies and cultural identities, instead of being named something kind of related to India or Hinduism or things like that, being connected with like the Indus Valley, they decided to rename to Pakistan. So even though they're related, they chose completely different names to kind of like reflect the social changes that were happening.
Right, which is really interesting because it's very similar to that personal level of like establishing your identity and who you are and like making that statement through the name that you choose to go by.
Yeah. So it's really interesting and something that I wonder about when some of these changes like reflect on a global level, like how quickly these things become adopted. Because I don't think I was alive when Pakistan separated from India. I think that happened before I was born. And I'm not completely aware of like the Congo and the Democratic Republic of Congo. And I think Czechoslovakia and the Czech Republic and Slovakia, that also happened before we were born. So I'm not actually sure how long it takes for some of these things to like get a footing in and being like put on maps and things like that.
Yeah.
Like before the internet age.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how things went down.
Well, I think that's really contextual and really dependent on the situation. Because if you take like the fall of the USSR and the breakup into different countries, it's like instantly you have countries adopting like their own identities again. And like, yes, when I was in Russia, there were still a lot of like older women that we'd run into who would be like, I am Soviet, I was born in the USSR, and have like a lot of pride in that.
Yeah.
But like it's a total switch.
Yeah,
right? And now everyone is like Russian and not Soviet.
Right.
And I think it really does depend on the reason for the change and how drastic that is and how big that cultural push is.
Yeah.
For how it takes on. I think a more controversial example that you brought up before we started recording is the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah.
And how President Trump tried to change it to the Gulf of America.
Yeah.
And like Google Maps, I think, almost instantly reflected that change of the name. And there's a lot of backlash. And I think that one is different because it is like nothing changed in the Gulf. Nothing changed in Mexico.
No, it is still a large body of water that we need to take care of. And like the landscape itself did not change.
Right, but it's like a political statement and a push for American nationalism. And like that renaming, it didn't have the same social political push behind it, and so it's much more controversial, I feel like.
Yes, I agree with that. Because it was more of a statement rather than a reflection of values. People have been a little loath to just jump on board with it.
Right. Yeah. And you have a lot of other things that just like with the political tides, like one side, one party is like, hey, we should, rename all of these military bases that were named after, Confederate generals or whatever it is. And then we want to name them back. Like, there's a lot of these like more political things that maybe people get a little bit used to the name because that change officially happened, but then you still have people referring to it by the old name because, that's where they lived or what it was when they were there. And so you get a lot of, like, I think a lot of these more controversial ones are a lot slower to take on.
Yeah.
To take hold in, like, people's references and minds because there's less of a clear divide, maybe, or like a less of a clear reason that everyone accepts.
Yes. Yeah. Because there is like a polarity to it. There's going to be more discussion around it and more like flip-flopping on it.
Right.
Yeah.
And by referring to it as, say, the Gulf of America, you're actually making a political statement basically right now that you support the, politicians or the party that's behind that change rather than anything else.
Yes.
Almost.
Yeah. Exactly. Lots of big, heavy stuff. The politics will definitely affect the way that things are named and stuff. It's very interesting. Something I kind of was thinking about in relation to this book, kind of like stepping away from like political stuff, is just the names of countries in different languages, which I've always kind of wondered about, because in the United States, I mean, we have our names for all the different countries.
You mean like called Germany Deutschland?
Yeah, and like in
Finland,
French,
Suomi.
Yeah, and in French, if you're speaking French, you don't say England, you say Allemand, right? Which is completely, I mean, it's related to England, but it's not how English people refer to their own country. So it's very interesting how different languages will have these different names for things, and how that kind of also has to be taken into consideration as you are making name changes.
Well, and like, I think that's an interesting example of like, translation of names is a thing.
It is,
like, and there's a space for that, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's a space for saying, I want to go by my name personally in this language, translated the way that it sounds more natural in that language. And I think that can happen on the country level.
Yeah.
Or countries can also be like, hey, we don't want you to call us that. We want you to call us this. And both of those things happen and I think are perfectly viable.
Yeah. Interesting, EJ. It sounds like some of our personal choices about names reflect some of our global choices about names.
Whoa. Mind blown.
Crazy.
All right. Well, I think that we have probably talked names to death.
Oh, I'm sure we could go on.
There's
whole journals just about names and naming.
There's whole books.
Yes.
So many books.
Yeah.
But we'll call it there for this episode. Thanks so much for listening in. Follow us on Instagram. We'd love to hear from you. Yeah,
share with us. Does your home country have a different name for itself than the English version of it? How is it different? Share with us your experiences and have a little convo. We love to chat. We're chatterboxes.
Absolutely. Till next time.
Bye.